Ambassador Kira pressed her webbed fingers against the cool metal wall and tried to remember when everything had started going wrong. The viewing port showed nothing but stars, the same stars that had watched over the Galactic Council for 300 peaceful years. But peace was ending, and everyone knew it. The council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different worlds gathered around the massive circular table. Kira had seen many emergency sessions in her 20 years as the Alterian Republic's voice, but none felt this desperate. The holographic display in the center showed red markers spreading across the outer rim like a disease. "The Ravager Horde has taken another system," announced Chancellor Wells, his usually steady voice cracking slightly. "The Meridian colonies fell 6 hours ago. No survivors." A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The Ravagers were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They didn't negotiate, didn't trade, didn't even seem interested in conquest for resources. They simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. Kira watched the human delegation sitting quietly in their assigned section. Earth had joined the Council only 5 years ago, and most species still viewed them with suspicion. Humans were too young, too aggressive, too quick to suggest military solutions to problems that civilized beings preferred to solve through diplomacy. "Our combined fleets have engaged the enemy 17 times, continued Wells. "We've lost 60% of our ships and gained nothing. Their technology is superior. Their numbers are vast and their tactics are brutal," finished Ambassador Stone from the Centauri Collective. "They fight like wild animals." General Harper from the human delegation shifted in his seat but said nothing. Kira had noticed how the humans always stayed quiet during these discussions, listening with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. They took notes, asked technical questions about enemy capabilities, and studied battle reports with the dedication of scholars. "We need new strategies," said Wells. "Our traditional defensive formations aren't working." "What about evacuation protocols?" suggested Representative Blue from the Aquatic Union. "We could move populations from threatened worlds to the inner systems and abandon 30 billion sentients to their fate," snapped Ambassador Stone. "Unacceptable." The debate continued for hours, the same circular arguments that had dominated every session for the past 6 months. Some wanted to negotiate with the Ravagers, despite all evidence that they had no interest in communication. Others proposed building massive defensive installations, even though the enemy had already proven capable of destroying such structures. Through it all, the humans remained silent. Kira found herself studying them more closely. General Harper was a compact man with graying hair and scars on his hands that suggested he'd seen actual combat. Beside him sat Dr. Amy Foster, their chief scientific advisor, who'd been quietly analyzing every piece of intelligence the Council had gathered about the Ravagers. The third member of their delegation was Admiral Beth Reed, a woman whose calm demeanor seemed almost unsettling given the circumstances. "Perhaps," said Chancellor Wells finally, "we should hear from all our members. Earth, you've been unusually quiet today." All eyes turned to the human section. General Harper stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber without effort. "We've been listening," he said simply, "and we've been studying your enemy." "The Ravagers are everyone's enemy," corrected Ambassador Stone with obvious irritation. "Of course," agreed Harper. "We're all in this together, but we've noticed some things about their tactics that might be useful." Wells gestured for him to continue. "They rely on overwhelming force and superior firepower," said Harper. "Their ships are heavily armed but not particularly maneuverable. They attack in straight lines using numerical superiority to break through defensive positions." "We know all this," interrupted Stone. "What's your point?" "Our point," said Admiral Reed, standing to join Harper, "is that they fight like a military force that's never faced real opposition. Their tactics work because they've been fighting enemies who think like you do." The chamber fell silent. Kira felt her gills flutter nervously as she recognized the implied criticism. Dr. Foster activated a small holographic display from her seat. "We've run simulations based on human military history. The Ravagers use patterns that would have been effective against Earth armies from about 800 years ago. They're not adapting because they haven't needed to." "And what would you have us do?" asked Wells carefully. "Let us show you how humans fight," said Reed quietly. The reaction was immediate and negative. Representatives from dozens of species began talking at once, their voices rising in protest. The humans had a reputation for violence that made most council members deeply uncomfortable. Earth's own history was filled with wars, conflicts, and military innovations that other species found disturbing. Absolutely not, declared Stone. We're not going to turn this into some primitive slugfest. Civilized beings don't solve problems through violence. With respect, said General Harper, civilized beings are dying by the millions because you're trying to fight a war using diplomatic principles. Kira watched the exchange with growing fascination. The humans weren't arguing or pushing their agenda aggressively. They simply stated facts with the confidence of beings who understood something the rest of the council didn't. We appreciate your input, said Wells diplomatically, but the council has voted to pursue defensive strategies that minimize casualties and collateral damage. Admiral Reed nodded as if she'd expected this response. Of course. We understand your position completely. Something in the way she said it made Kira's skin crawl. The humans weren't disappointed or frustrated by the rejection. They seemed almost relieved. The session continued for another hour, but no real decisions were made. The same defensive strategies that had failed repeatedly were refined and reinforced. Plans were made for evacuation fleets and refugee camps. The humans listened politely and offered technical assistance for humanitarian efforts. As the delegates began filing out, Kira found herself walking beside Dr. Foster. You don't seem surprised by the council's decision, she said carefully. Foster smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. We've been studying the Ravagers for 6 months. We know exactly what they're capable of, how they think, and what it will take to stop them. And now we know what the council is capable of too. Before Kira could ask what that meant, Foster had disappeared into the crowd. But her words echoed in Kira's mind as she made her way back to her quarters. For the first time since the crisis began, she wondered if the galaxy's newest members might understand something about survival that the older, more civilized species had forgotten. 2 days after the council rejected human assistance, the Ravagers broke through the defensive line at Proxima Gate. Kira received the news while reviewing refugee allocation reports in her private office, and the datapad slipped from her numb fingers as she absorbed the implications. Proxima Gate had been considered impregnable. The Council's finest engineers had spent decades designing the defensive installations, creating overlapping fields of fire that should have stopped any conceivable attack. 3 full battle fleets had been stationed there, commanded by Admiral Voss, the most experienced military leader in Council history. The Ravagers had destroyed everything in 4 hours. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the station as delegates rushed to reconvene. Kira arrived at the council chamber to find chaos. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen different languages while holographic displays showed the devastating aftermath at Proxima Gate. Twisted metal debris drifted through space where mighty starships had once patrolled. 70,000 personnel. Chancellor Wells announced, his voice hollow. Total casualties. Admiral Voss's flagship was destroyed with all hands. The chamber fell silent. Voss had been a legend, a being who'd kept peace in contested regions for 40 years. If the Ravagers could destroy him and his fleet so easily, what hope did anyone else have? The enemy is advancing on 3 vectors, continued Wells. At their current speed, they'll reach the inner systems within 10 days. Ambassador Stone stood shakily. What about the reserve fleets? The fortress worlds? Already repositioning, but intelligence indicates the Ravagers have reinforcements arriving daily. Their forces grow stronger while ours diminish. Kira noticed the human delegation entering quietly, taking their seats without fanfare. General Harper's expression remained neutral, but she caught Admiral Reed checking a small device that seemed to be tracking fleet movements. We need new options, declared Representative Blue. Everything we've tried has failed. The debate that followed felt different from previous sessions. The confident voices that had dismissed human suggestions now carried notes of desperation. Proposal after proposal was raised and discarded as impractical or impossible, given their current situation. After 2 hours of fruitless discussion, Chancellor Wells looked directly at the human section. General Harper, Admiral Reed, does your government have any recommendations? Harper exchanged glances with his colleagues before standing. We do, but you're not going to like it. "We're listening," said Wells. Admiral Reed activated the chamber's main holographic display, replacing the casualty reports with a detailed tactical analysis. The Ravagers fight in predictable patterns. They mass their forces and attack the strongest defensive positions directly, using superior firepower to overwhelm resistance. "Yes, we know this," said Stone impatiently. "So you keep building stronger defenses," continued Reed calmly, "which is exactly what they expect you to do." The display shifted to show the Crimson Nebula, a vast region of space filled with unstable stellar phenomena. Gas clouds, magnetic storms, and gravitational anomalies made it a navigation nightmare that most ships avoided entirely. "Our proposal is simple," said Reed. "We lure their main fleet into the nebula and use the environment against them." Dr. Foster added her own analysis to the display. "Human military doctrine emphasizes using terrain to multiply force effectiveness. The nebula isn't an obstacle, it's a weapon we can control." Kira studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The human plan involved using the nebula's magnetic fields to disable enemy shields, coordinating attacks with stellar flares to mask approach vectors, and employing what the humans called swarm tactics to overwhelm larger ships. "This is insane," breathed Ambassador Stone. "You're talking about deliberate navigation into the most dangerous region of known space." "We're talking about winning," replied Harper quietly. "The casualty projections for this strategy are horrific," protested Representative Blue. "You're essentially proposing organized suicide attacks." Admiral Reed's smile was thin but confident. "The casualty projections assume your pilots don't know what they're doing. Human pilots train for these environments." The implications of that statement hung heavy in the chamber. While other species had developed space travel for exploration and trade, humans had apparently been preparing for war among the stars. Dr. Foster continued the briefing with clinical precision. Phase 1 involves positioning bait fleets to draw the Ravagers into the nebula. Phase 2 uses coordinated electromagnetic pulses to disable their command ships. Phase 3 employs what we call harassment protocols to maintain constant pressure, while larger forces maneuver into position. "Harassment protocols?" asked Wells. "Small, fast ships making repeated attacks on critical systems," explained Harper. "Like being stung to death by insects." Kira felt her blood chill as she realized what the humans were really proposing. They wanted to fight the Ravagers using tactics that no civilized species would consider. Strategies that required pilots willing to sacrifice themselves for tactical advantage. "This is barbarism," declared Stone. "We're not going to turn our people into kamikaze pilots." "Then you're going to lose," said Reed matter-of-factly. "The Ravagers aren't going to be stopped by civilized tactics. They've proven that decisively." The debate that followed was fierce but brief. Representative after representative stood to denounce the human strategy as too dangerous, too aggressive, too likely to result in massive casualties. The mathematical projections showed potential success, but the cost in lives was staggering by council standards. Finally, Chancellor Wells called for a formal vote. "All in favor of implementing the human battle plan?" 3 hands rose. The humans abstained. All opposed. 41 hands rose immediately. "Motion defeated," announced Wells. "We'll continue with reinforced defensive positions and systematic evacuation of threatened worlds." "Admiral," Reed nodded as if the outcome had been predetermined. "Understood. We'd like permission to position our fleets as support units during your defensive operations." "Granted," said Wells, "and thank you for your input." As the session dispersed, Kira found herself walking beside Dr. Foster again. "You don't seem disappointed," she observed. Foster's smile was genuinely warm this time. "Ambassador, in human military history, the best generals were always the ones who found ways to win even when their superiors made terrible decisions." "What does that mean?" "It means," said Foster, "that Admiral Reed didn't become humanity's youngest fleet commander by following orders she knew were wrong." The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. "The Council specifically voted against your strategy." "The Council voted against officially adopting our strategy," corrected Foster. "They didn't vote against us using our own ships to fight effectively." As the human delegation disappeared down the corridor, Kira realized that Earth's representatives had never intended to convince the Council. They'd simply been giving their allies one last chance to choose survival over protocol. The humans were going to implement their plan regardless of council approval. And somehow that knowledge was more terrifying than anything the Ravagers had done. The Ravager horde emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metallic locusts, their massive fleet blotting out the stars around the Crimson Nebula. Kira watched from the command bridge of the Council flagship Unity's Pride, as hundreds of enemy vessels arranged themselves in attack formation, their dark hulls gleaming with weapon ports and armor plating designed for one purpose only: destruction. Enemy force estimate now exceeds 1,200 ships, reported Lieutenant Brooks, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. They've brought their entire main battle fleet. Admiral Voss's replacement, Admiral Chen, studied the tactical displays with the grim expression of someone who knew he was about to die. The Council's combined fleets numbered fewer than 300 ships, and their defensive positions around the nebula's edge looked pathetically inadequate against the approaching armada. All ships, assume defensive formation Gamma 7, Chen ordered. Concentrate fire on their command vessels when they come within range. Kira gripped the bridge railing as the massive enemy fleet began its advance. The Ravagers moved with mechanical precision, their ships maintaining perfect formation as they approached the Council forces. No communication attempts, no demands for surrender, no hesitation. They simply came forward like a wall of death. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human support flotilla," reported the communications officer. Admiral Chen frowned. The humans had positioned their small fleet of 50 ships in what most observers considered a useless position, scattered throughout the region rather than concentrated for mutual support. "Put them through." Admiral Reed's voice came across the channel with unsettling calm. "Admiral Chen, our long-range sensors are picking up additional enemy forces approaching from the far side of the nebula. You're about to be surrounded." Chen's face paled as his own sensors confirmed the report. More Ravager ships were emerging from hyperspace, positioning themselves to cut off any potential retreat. "How many?" Chen asked. "Another 800 vessels minimum. They've been planning this trap for weeks." The bridge fell silent as the full scope of the disaster became clear. The Council fleets weren't just outnumbered, they were completely outmaneuvered. The Ravagers had used the nebula itself as cover to position forces that would annihilate any ship trying to escape. "Recommendations?" Chen asked quietly. "Follow your original plan," replied Reed. "We'll adapt as circumstances require." Something in the way she said, "adapt," made Kira's skin crawl. But there was no time to analyze the implications. The first Ravager ships had entered weapons range. "All batteries, open fire," Chen commanded. The space around the nebula erupted in brilliant flashes as energy weapons discharged across impossible distances. The Council ships fought with desperate courage, their crews knowing that failure meant the end of galactic civilization as they knew it. But courage wasn't enough. The Ravager ships absorbed the initial barrage with minimal damage, their armor designed to withstand exactly this type of concentrated assault. When they returned fire, entire Council vessels disappeared in expanding balls of superheated plasma. "Direct hit on the Meridian's Hope," reported Tactical. "No survivors. The Centauri defense is breaking up. Hull breach on decks 7 through 15. Avalon Station requests immediate assistance. They're being overwhelmed." Kira watched in horror as the careful battle plan disintegrated within minutes. The Ravagers weren't just defeating the Council forces, they were systematically destroying them with clinical efficiency. Their ships worked together like parts of a single organism, concentrating fire to eliminate targets before moving on to the next. "Sir, we've lost contact with Admiral Parker's squadron," reported communications. Last transmission indicated they were attempting to fall back to secondary positions. "Negative," Chen replied grimly. "All ships hold position. We make our stand here." But the stand was clearly failing. Enemy ships pushed through the defensive lines like they were paper, their weapons tearing apart starships that had taken decades to build. The carefully coordinated formation that military theorists had spent years perfecting crumbled under the relentless assault. "Admiral, the flagship Harmony's light has lost main power," Tactical announced. "They're drifting into the enemy formation." Chen closed his eyes briefly. The Harmony's light carried 5,000 crew members and the combined governments of 12 worlds. "Signal all remaining ships," he ordered. "Begin emergency evacuation procedures. Get as many people out as possible before—" "Sir," the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Reed. Not now, Lieutenant. Sir, she says it's time. Admiral Chen looked confused. Time for what? Reed's voice came across the channel before he could respond. Admiral Chen, are you ready to see how humans fight? The question seemed absurd given the circumstances. The human flotilla was tiny compared to the massive battle raging around them, their 50 ships scattered across dozens of light years. What could they possibly do that would matter? Admiral Reed, Chen replied carefully. I appreciate any assistance you can provide, but the situation is exactly what we expected, Reed interrupted. Admiral, I'm going to ask you to trust us. Order your remaining ships to fall back toward the nebula entrance. Get them out of our operational area. Your operational area? Kira moved closer to the communication station, straining to hear Reed's response. Admiral, Reed said quietly, you've been fighting their battle. Now we're going to fight ours. Before Chen could ask what that meant, new contacts began appearing on the tactical displays. Ships were emerging from hyperspace, but not where anyone expected. They materialized inside the nebula itself, coming out of the swirling gas clouds and electromagnetic storms that had been considered impassable. Human ships. Hundreds of them. How is that possible? Breathed Chen. Navigation through the nebula is impossible. The interference is only impossible, Reed replied, if you fight the environment instead of using it. Kira stared at the tactical display as more human ships appeared throughout the nebula, their positions seemingly random but somehow perfectly coordinated. They hadn't been hiding in normal space where sensors could detect them. They'd been hiding inside the most dangerous region of the local galaxy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. All Council vessels, immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance, Reed ordered with quiet authority. Things are about to get interesting. As the surviving Council ships limped away from the battle zone, Kira realized that everything they'd witnessed so far had been preparation. The humans hadn't been supporting the Council's defensive strategy. They'd been using it as bait. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, the human ships appeared to be scattered randomly throughout the nebula. The next, they moved like a single predator awakening from sleep. Kira pressed against the viewing port as the Unity's pride pulled back to what Admiral Chen hoped was a safe distance. Through the swirling gases of the Crimson Nebula, she could see flashes of weapons fire that followed no pattern she recognized. The humans weren't engaging in the stately, formation-based combat that defined civilized warfare. They were hunting. Tactical, what are the human ships doing? Chen demanded. Lieutenant Brooks stared at his displays with confusion. Sir, they're not maintaining any recognizable formation. Individual vessels are moving independently, using the nebula's magnetic fields to... I don't understand these maneuvers. Explain. They're using gravitational slings around the dense matter pockets. Their ships are accelerating to velocities that should tear them apart, then using the momentum to attack enemy vessels from impossible angles. Through the command channel, they could hear fragments of human communications. Unlike the formal military protocols used by Council forces, the humans spoke in rapid, clipped phrases that seemed almost telepathic in their efficiency. Hunter 7, you have 3 marks coming around the gas giant. Paint them. Copy. Hunter 7. Rabbit 4, execute pattern Delta on my mark. Rabbit 4 confirms. Stalker Squadron, provide cover fire. The terminology meant nothing to Kira, but the tone was unmistakable. These weren't desperate defenders fighting for survival. These were experienced predators engaging in familiar work. Sir, Brooks announced, his voice rising with excitement, the Ravagers are taking heavy casualties. They've lost 17 ships in the past 5 minutes. Chen moved to study the tactical display personally. How is that possible? The human ships are individually smaller and less heavily armed. They're not fighting individual duels, Brooks explained. Watch this engagement here. 6 human ships coordinate an attack on a single Ravager vessel. They approach from different vectors, force it to turn its shields toward the primary threat. Then the other 5 attack the exposed section simultaneously. Kira watched the pattern repeat across dozens of engagements throughout the nebula. The humans had turned space combat into something resembling a pack hunt, with ships working together to isolate and destroy targets that should have been superior in every measurable way. But it was more than just tactics. The human pilots were performing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics itself. They dove through electromagnetic storms that would have disabled any other ship, used solar flares to mask their approach vectors, and somehow maintained perfect coordination despite interference that should have made communication impossible. "Admiral Chen," came Reed's voice over the command channel. "Are your sensors tracking the engagement near coordinate 77 Mark IV? Chen located the position on his display. "Yes, I see it. A single human ship is engaging 3 Ravager vessels. That's Lieutenant Commander Smith in the Defiant. Watch what she does." Kira focused on the indicated area just as a massive solar flare erupted from the nebula's central star. The electromagnetic pulse should have blinded every sensor and disabled every ship in the vicinity. Instead, the human vessel seemed to ride the energy wave, using the flare's magnetic field to accelerate directly toward the enemy formation. The Ravager ships, temporarily blinded by the interference, never saw the attack coming. By the time their sensors cleared, 2 of their vessels had been destroyed and the third was drifting powerless. "How did she navigate through that storm?" Chen asked. "She didn't navigate through it," Reed replied. "She used it. Lieutenant Commander Smith has been training in stellar storm navigation since she was 16. What you consider a natural disaster, she considers a tactical advantage." The scope of what they were witnessing began to dawn on Kira. The humans hadn't just prepared for this battle, they'd prepared for this type of warfare. While other species developed space technology for exploration and trade, humanity had been perfecting combat techniques that treated the universe itself as a weapon. "Sir, the Ravager command ship is trying to reorganize their forces," Brooks reported. "They're pulling back into a defensive formation." Through the viewing port, Kira could see the massive enemy vessels attempting to regroup. The Ravagers had stopped their advance and were trying to establish overlapping fields of fire that would prevent the human ships from making their lightning attacks. "They're learning," Chen observed with grudging respect. "The Ravagers are adapting to human tactics." Reed's laughter carried clearly over the communication channel. "Admiral, they're trying to fight the last battle. Let me show you what happens when humans adapt." The human ships throughout the nebula suddenly changed their behavior completely. Instead of the individual hunting patterns they'd been using, they began moving in perfect coordination. Ships that had been operating independently across light years of space somehow began working together as if connected by invisible strings. "Brooks, explain what I'm seeing," Chen ordered. "Sir, the entire human fleet is executing what appears to be a single, coordinated maneuver. They're using the nebula's gravitational anomalies to position themselves for—" Brooks fell silent as the realization hit him. "For what, Lieutenant?" "For a simultaneous attack on every enemy ship. Sir, they're going to hit the entire Ravager fleet at the same moment." Kira watched in awe as hundreds of human ships positioned themselves throughout the 3-dimensional maze of the nebula. Some hid behind gas clouds, others used asteroid fields for cover, and a few actually positioned themselves inside stellar phenomena that should have been instantly fatal. "All units, this is Admiral Reed," came the announcement over all channels. "Pattern Omega is now in effect. Execute in 30 seconds." The countdown that followed was conducted in absolute silence. No last-minute adjustments, no coordination chatter, no questions or clarifications. The human fleet simply waited with the patience of experienced hunters. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute. The nebula erupted in light as every human ship attacked simultaneously. Energy weapons discharged from impossible angles, missiles streaked through electromagnetic storms, and coordinated strikes hit the Ravager formation with mathematical precision. In less than 10 seconds, the most powerful military force in galactic history simply ceased to exist. "Status report," Chen whispered. Brooks stared at his sensors in disbelief. "Sir, the Ravager main fleet has been completely destroyed. No ships escaped. Total enemy casualties. And our allies? Human fleet reports minimal losses. They're already beginning recovery operations." Kira felt her legs give out as the full implications hit her. The Ravager horde, which had seemed unstoppable, had been annihilated by a species that most council members still considered primitive. The humans hadn't just won the battle, they'd made it look effortless. "Admiral Reed," Chen called over the communication channel. "How do we thank you for this?" Reed's response was quiet, but carried clearly across the bridge. "You don't thank us, Admiral. You remember that there are some problems that can only be solved by those willing to embrace the darkness between the stars?" As human ships began emerging from the nebula, their hulls scarred, but their formations perfect, Kira realized that the galaxy had just witnessed something unprecedented, not just a military victory, but a demonstration of what humanity was truly capable of when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The silence that followed the destruction of the main Ravager fleet lasted exactly 47 seconds. Then every communication channel in the region erupted simultaneously as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Kira stood frozen on the bridge of Unity's Pride, watching Admiral Chen try to process information that challenged everything the Council thought they knew about warfare, politics, and the balance of power in civilized space. "Sir, we're receiving priority transmissions from the outer colonies," announced the communications officer, his voice tight with disbelief. "The Ravager forces that were besieging New Geneva they've surrendered." Chen looked up from the tactical display where he'd been studying the debris field that had once been an unstoppable armada. "Surrendered? The Ravagers don't surrender. Apparently they do when they realize what happened to their main fleet." More reports followed in rapid succession. Ravager forces throughout the galaxy were either retreating at maximum speed or attempting to negotiate with local authorities. The species that had never shown any interest in communication was suddenly very interested in discussing terms. Through the viewing port, Kira watched human ships moving through the aftermath of battle with methodical efficiency. They weren't celebrating or posturing. They were working, collecting intelligence, analyzing enemy technology, and preparing for whatever came next. "Admiral Chen." Admiral Reed's voice came over the command channel. "We need to discuss the strategic situation." "I'm listening," Chen replied. "The Ravagers sent their entire main battle fleet to this engagement. With it destroyed, their remaining forces are scattered across 40 systems with no central command structure. They're vulnerable." Dr. Foster's voice joined the conversation. "Our analysis indicates they have approximately 300 vessels remaining, mostly support ships and local garrison forces. Without their command ships and experienced officers, they're essentially stranded." Admiral Chen studied the strategic displays showing Ravager positions throughout the galaxy. "What are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting," Reed replied calmly, "that this war can be ended within the next 72 hours. The bridge fell silent. Ending the Ravager threat completely had seemed impossible just hours ago. Now the humans were discussing it like a routine military operation. "How?" Chen asked. "By doing what we've always done," Reed answered. "By thinking like predators instead of prey." The tactical display shifted to show a galaxy-wide view of Ravager positions. Red markers indicated enemy forces, while blue markers showed Council fleets and human ships throughout known space. The Ravagers expanded too. "Quickly," explained Dr. Foster. "They scattered their forces to maintain control of conquered territories. With their main fleet gone, each remaining group is isolated and outnumbered. But they still control hundreds of worlds," protested Chen. "The logistics of mounting campaigns against every occupied system would take years. Only if you think like the Council," Reed replied. "We don't need to liberate every world. We need to eliminate their ability to coordinate resistance." The display zoomed in on specific systems, highlighting what appeared to be communication relay stations and supply depots. "Ravager strategy depends on centralized command and regular supply shipments," Foster continued. "Cut those lifelines and their forces become isolated garrison units with no way to support each other." Kira realized what the humans were proposing with growing amazement. While the Council would have planned massive liberation campaigns to free occupied worlds, humanity intended to destroy the enemy's infrastructure and let their forces collapse from within. "The scattered Ravager groups can't effectively communicate with each other," Reed explained. "They don't know what happened here, and they don't know what's happening to their neighboring forces. We can eliminate them systematically before they realize the scope of their situation." "You're talking about simultaneous operations across dozens of systems," Chen pointed out. "The coordination requirements alone are well within human capabilities," Reed finished. "Admiral, We've been planning for this type of campaign since we joined the Council. Every human ship in space is already moving toward assigned targets. The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just prepared for this specific battle. They developed contingency plans for the complete elimination of the Ravager threat. Plans that were already being implemented while the Council was still trying to understand what had happened. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the Vega system," announced the communications officer. "Human forces have engaged and destroyed the Ravager garrison fleet. No enemy survivors. Confirmed strike at Wolf 359, added tactical. Human ships eliminated 3 Ravager command vessels and 17 support craft. More reports followed, as human fleets throughout the galaxy began implementing what was clearly a coordinated strategy developed months in advance. While Council forces had been fighting defensively, losing ground with every engagement, humanity had been positioning assets for a comprehensive offensive that would end the war in a matter of days. "Admiral Reed," Chen said carefully, "how long have you been planning this?" "Since the day we joined the Council," Reed replied without hesitation. "We analyzed the Ravager threat, developed multiple response scenarios, and positioned our forces accordingly." "You were prepared for this war before it started?" "Admiral, we've been prepared for every war before it started. That's what humans do." Dr. Foster added her own analysis to the conversation. "Ravager expansion patterns were predictable once we understood their psychology. They're efficient killers but poor strategists. They rely on overwhelming force rather than tactical innovation. So you let them advance until they overextended themselves," Chen realized. "We let them reveal the full scope of their capabilities while keeping our own hidden," Reed confirmed. "The Council's defensive strategies provided excellent intelligence-gathering opportunities." Kira felt a chill as she understood the full scope of human planning. The Council's failures hadn't been failures at all from humanity's perspective. They'd been intelligence operations designed to learn everything possible about enemy capabilities, while positioning human forces for maximum strategic advantage. "Sir, updated casualty reports from the human fleet," Brooks announced. "Total losses: 12 ships destroyed, 47 damaged but operational. Enemy losses: total annihilation of all forces engaged. The mathematics were staggering. The humans had achieved the most decisive military victory in galactic history, while suffering losses that barely qualified as casualties by traditional standards." "Admiral Chen," Reed said, "we estimate that organized Ravager resistance will collapse within 48 hours. The scattered garrison forces will either surrender or be eliminated piecemeal." And then, there was a pause before Reed answered, and when she did, her voice carried implications that made Kira's blood run cold. "And then, Admiral, the galaxy will be safe, under human protection." The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed the meaning of that statement. The Ravager threat would be eliminated, but the species that accomplished that elimination would emerge as the dominant military power in known space. "Admiral Reed," Chen said finally, "the Council will want to discuss the post-war situation." "Of course," Reed replied pleasantly. "We look forward to those discussions." But as human ships continued their systematic destruction of Ravager forces throughout the galaxy, Kira realized that those discussions would be very different from anything the Council had experienced before. They wouldn't be negotiations between equals. They would be conversations between the conquered and their new protectors. 71 hours after the Battle of Crimson Nebula, the last Ravager stronghold fell to human forces at the edge of the Andromeda Transit. Kira received the news while standing in the observation deck of Unity's Pride, watching human patrol ships move through space with the casual confidence of apex predators in familiar territory. The war was over. The Ravager threat that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 years had been completely eliminated in less than 3 days of human military action. Not defeated, not contained, not negotiated with. Eliminated. Chancellor Wells had called an emergency session to discuss the post-war situation, but Kira suspected the meeting would be unlike any in Council history. The balance of power hadn't just shifted. It had been completely rewritten by beings who understood warfare in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of civilized society. "Ambassador Kira," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Dr. Foster approaching, carrying a data pad and wearing the same calm expression that had become unsettling familiar during the crisis. Dr. Foster, I suppose you're here to discuss the transition arrangements. Foster smiled, but there was something different in her manner now. The careful deference that humans had shown to council authority was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of beings who no longer needed to pretend they weren't in charge. Actually, I'm here to offer you a choice, Foster said simply. What kind of choice? The kind that will determine whether your people thrive or merely survive in the new galactic order. Kira felt her gills flutter nervously. I'm not sure I understand. Foster activated her datapad, displaying information that made Kira's blood chill. Complete intelligence profiles on every council member species, detailed analyses of their military capabilities, economic dependencies, and political structures. The humans hadn't just been studying the Ravagers during their membership in the council. They'd been studying everyone. The war revealed certain truths about galactic civilization. Foster continued conversationally. The council's defensive strategies failed because they were designed by beings who think of warfare as an unfortunate necessity, rather than a fundamental aspect of existence, and humans think differently. Humans understand that peace is maintained by those capable of violence on behalf of those who aren't. The Ravagers threatened civilized society because civilized society had forgotten how to fight. Through the viewing port, Kira watched human ships patrolling space that had been contested just days before. Their movements were efficient and purposeful, but there was an underlying menace that hadn't been there when they were merely council members. What happens now? Kira asked. That depends on the choices your leaders make, Foster replied. The council can continue to exist, but its role will necessarily change. The humans will provide military protection and strategic guidance. In return, member species will contribute to collective security according to their capabilities. And if the council refuses these arrangements? Foster's smile became genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying. Ambassador, the council will not refuse. Your leaders are intelligent beings who understand that cooperation is preferable to the alternatives. The implications were clear without being stated directly. The species that had just eliminated the most dangerous military threat in galactic history were now offering protection services that couldn't be declined. The Altarian Republic has always valued independence, Kira said, carefully, and you'll retain as much independence as is compatible with collective security, Foster assured her. The humans have no interest in micromanaging internal affairs. We're concerned with strategic threats and resource allocation for defensive purposes. Defensive purposes? The Ravagers weren't the only predatory species in the galaxy, Ambassador. They were simply the most immediate threat. Human intelligence has identified several other potential dangers that will require preemptive action. Kira realized that the humans weren't just offering protection from known threats. They were positioning themselves as the permanent guardians of galactic civilization, with the authority to determine what constituted a threat and how it should be addressed. Dr. Foster, what you're describing sounds like leadership? Foster finished gently. Yes, it does. The question is whether your people are ready to accept leadership from beings who understand what survival actually requires. The council session that followed was unlike anything in the organization's 300-year history. Representatives who had arrived expecting to negotiate post-war arrangements found themselves listening to Admiral Reed explain the new strategic reality with clinical precision. Human forces now control all major hyperspace routes, communication relays, and strategic resources, Reed announced without preamble. This control will be maintained indefinitely to ensure galactic stability. Chancellor Wells attempted to maintain diplomatic protocol. Admiral, the Council appreciates humanity's assistance during the crisis, but we need to discuss the return to normal governance structures. Reed's expression didn't change. Chancellor, normal governance structures failed to prevent the near extinction of galactic civilization. They will not be restored. The chamber erupted in protests from representatives who suddenly understood that they weren't negotiating terms of partnership, but accepting terms of surrender. This is unacceptable, declared Ambassador Stone. The Council will not submit to human military occupation. You're not submitting to occupation, Reed replied calmly. You're accepting protection from the only species capable of providing it. General Harper activated a holographic display showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Every major world trade route and strategic resource is now under human protection. This protection will continue for as long as it's needed. And who decides when it's no longer needed? Demanded Stone. We do, Reed answered simply. The debate that followed was passionate but brief. Representative after representative stood to protest the new arrangements, but their arguments carried no weight against the simple reality of human military dominance. Finally, Chancellor Wells called for order. What exactly are you proposing? We're not proposing anything, Reed replied. We're explaining the new reality. The Council will continue to handle civilian governance under human oversight. Military and strategic decisions will be made by human commanders according to human priorities. Dr. Foster stood to address the chamber. This transition can be smooth and beneficial for everyone, or it can be difficult and costly. The choice belongs to you. As the session concluded with formal acceptance of human authority, Kira found herself thinking about the transformation she'd witnessed. The humans hadn't conquered the galaxy through aggressive expansion or territorial ambition. They'd simply solved a problem that no one else could solve, then refused to pretend they weren't the only ones capable of solving similar problems in the future. Walking through the corridors of the station that would now serve as headquarters for human galactic administration, Kira realized that she'd witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just a change of leadership, but the emergence of a species that treated warfare as a science and peace as a responsibility that required constant vigilance. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not through conquest but through competence. And somehow that knowledge was both terrifying and oddly comforting. The humans had proven they could destroy any threat to civilized society. Now they would prove whether they could protect it better than it had protected itself.